Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto's marriage proposal to Nami was a promise to conquer the Grand Line for her? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Promise on a Storm-Tossed Sea. The sea was a beast, and it was angry. It threw the splintered remains of the small fishing boat around like a child's toy, each wave a fist that threatened to hammer it into oblivion. Nami clung to a broken mast, the coarse rope biting into her raw palms. Saltwater stung her eyes and burned in her throat, a constant, choking reminder of her own powerlessness. The sky was a bruise of bruised purples and churning blacks, split open every few moments by a jagged white scar of lightning. The world had become a symphony of roaring water and cracking thunder, and she was trapped in its heart. It felt fitting, a world torn apart by a storm, just like her own. Just days ago, or was it weeks? Time had become a blur of terror and desperation. She had a crew. A family. She had a captain whose boundless, idiotic grin was as bright as the sun. She had a swordsman who could get lost on a straight road but never in a fight. A liar who told the grandest tales and made them come true. A cook who fought with his feet and loved with his heart. A doctor who believed he was a monster but was the kindest soul she knew. A scholar who held the ghosts of an entire nation in her quiet hands. A shipwright whose boisterous energy was matched only by his genius. A musician who had waited 50 years to keep a promise. They had been unstoppable. They were going to conquer the Grand Line. Luffy was going to be king of the pirates. And she was going to draw the map of the entire world. Then came the light, the bubble bursting, the cold, indifferent voice of Bartholomew Kuma, and the disappearances. One by one, her family had been swatted away like flies, sent to gods nowhere, leaving her utterly, terrifyingly alone. That crushing, absolute defeat was a wound deeper than any blade could inflict. It had hollowed her out, leaving behind a jagged, aching void where hope used to be. The slavers who had found her drifting, a lone survivor from a small skirmish on a nearby island, were just the final insult. They saw a pretty young woman, a prize to be sold. They hadn't seen the storm brewing in her eyes, the same storm now trying to swallow the sea. She had fought back, of course. With the last of her strength and the desperate ingenuity born of a lifetime of survival, she had used her climatic to turn the weather against them, helping the raging sea tear their vessel apart. It had been a hollow victory. Now she was just as doomed as they were, only her death would be slower, colder. A shape cut through the rain-slicked gloom. A ship, larger and more menacing than the slavers' vessel. Its prow carved into the likeness of a snarling beast. Figures moved on its deck, their cruel laughter carrying over the howl of the wind. A new set of captors. Or perhaps just opportunistic vultures. Circling what they thought was a dying meal. A grappling hook shot out, landing with a heavy thud on a piece of floating debris near her. They were reeling her in. Nami's grip tightened on the mast. Her knuckles were white, her body trembling with cold and exhaustion, but a familiar, bitter fire burned in her gut. She would not be a prize. She would not be a slave. She would bite and claw and fight until the last breath was stolen from her lungs. If she was going to die, she would die as a pirate of the Straw Hat crew, a fighter, a navigator who spat in the face of the storm. It was all she had left. And then, something changed. It wasn't a sound, or a sight, but a feeling. A sudden, impossible stillness that pressed in on the chaos. The rain, which had been driving down in stinging sheets, slowed to a gentle patter. The waves, which had been crashing with mountainous fury, softened into a rolling swell. The wind died, its roar fading to a whisper. It was as if the storm itself was holding its breath. A golden light bloomed in the heart of the tempest. It wasn't the harsh glare of lightning, but a warm, steady radiance, like a miniature sun. Had been born between the clouds and the sea. Nami squinted, her arm shielding her eyes. The approaching ship had stopped, its crew frozen, pointing with expressions of slack-jawed disbelief. From the center of that light, a man appeared. He wasn't on a boat. He wasn't swimming. He was standing on the surface of the churning water as if it were solid ground. He was tall, dressed in a simple black shirt and dark pants under a long, flowing white coat with red flames licking up the bottom. His hair was the color of sunshine, a shock of bright gold against the oppressive gray of the world. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were a startling, piercing blue, ancient and calm, and they seemed to see right through the storm, right through the waves, right into the very core of her. He raised a hand, his palm open and facing the pirate ship. He didn't shout a challenge or make a threat. He simply spoke, his voice not loud, but carrying with an unnatural clarity over the now quiet sea. "Leave her." The laughter that answered him was ragged and cruel. The captain, a hulking man with a matted beard and an axe slung over his shoulder, bellowed, "And who in the hells are you to give us orders? Get him, boys. He'll fetch a fine price if he's a devil fruit user." A dozen men charged, leaping from their ship with swords drawn. They didn't even make it halfway. The golden-haired man's expression didn't change. He simply made a small, almost imperceptible gesture with his fingers. The air around him shimmered. A sphere of swirling, chaotic energy, no larger than his palm, spun to life above his hand. It screamed with a sound that was 1,000 shrieking winds compressed into a single point. He didn't throw it, he just let it expand. What happened next defied every law of nature Nami had ever studied. A whirlwind, a contained and perfectly controlled tornado, erupted from his hand. It did not rage wildly, it moved with purpose, a surgical instrument of utter destruction. It engulfed the charging pirates, their screams swallowed by the shriek of the wind. It struck their ship not with a crash, but with a grinding, tearing force that ripped the vessel apart plank by plank. Wood, metal, and sailcloth were disintegrated into a vortex of splinters and dust. In less than 5 seconds, the ship, and everyone on it, was gone. Not sunk, erased. The whirlwind collapsed back into nothingness, leaving behind only the placid, rain-drizzled surface of the sea. The man stood in the center of it all, untouched, the golden aura around him fading slightly, his expression as serene as a calm morning. Nami stared, her mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. It wasn't a devil fruit power. She had seen logias, parameshas, zones. They manipulated elements, changed their bodies, became beasts. This was different. This was control. This was creation and annihilation held in the palm of a hand. It was the power of a god, not a man. He turned his attention to her, and the intensity in his gaze softened. He walked across the water, each step firm, until he stood before her small piece of wreckage. He looked at her, his eyes taking in her shivering frame, her torn clothes. The defiant exhaustion etched on her face. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. Nami flinched. The question was so simple, so normal, it felt absurd after the casual apocalypse she had just seen. She opened her mouth, but only a dry, rasping sound came out. She swallowed, trying to find her voice. What are you?" "My name is Naruto Uzumaki," he said, offering a small, sad smile. "And right now, I'm just a man a long way from home." He extended a hand. "Let's get you somewhere safe." She hesitated for only a second. Every instinct screamed at her to be wary, to never trust anyone. Especially someone with this kind of monstrous power. But there was no malice in his eyes. Only a quiet strength and a deep, resonant weariness that she found strangely familiar. His hand was steady, his grip warm and firm as he easily lifted her from the water and onto the surprisingly solid section of the broken deck where he now stood. It didn't rock, it didn't sway, it was as stable as an island. He knelt, and the golden aura, she now realized, was a tangible warmth, a cloak of energy that pushed back the biting cold of the sea air. "You're freezing," he murmured. He shrugged off his long white coat and draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy, warm, and smelled faintly of ozone and sunshine. The simple act of kindness was so unexpected it nearly broke her. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, hot and sharp. She fought them back ruthlessly. She would not cry, not in front of him. He didn't press her for answers. He just sat with her in the quiet aftermath of the storm. The sky slowly beginning to lighten in the east. He produced a canteen and a small, wrapped ration bar from somewhere inside his shirt. He offered them to her silently. The water was fresh, and the food, while plain, was the best thing she had ever tasted. As she ate, the last of her adrenaline faded, leaving behind an exhaustion so profound it was a physical weight on her bones. "They're gone," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. All of them. Naruto watched her, his expression unreadable. Your crew. She nodded, a single, jerky motion. We were at Sabayati. We weren't strong enough. An admiral, a warlord. They just took them. Made them vanish. I don't know if they're alive or dead. The words tumbled out, a torrent of grief she had held back for too long. We were going to conquer the seas. We were going to make our dreams come true. Luffy. He was going to be king. Her voice cracked on his name. And I was going to map the world. Every island, every current, every sea. A map of the whole world. That was my dream. She looked down at her hands, hands that could chart the stars and predict the weather, now empty and useless. What's the point of a map if there's nowhere safe to go? Every line I draw just leads to another cage, another tyrant, another monster who thinks they can own the sea. The Marines with their absolute justice, the emperors with their bloody thrones. They've carved up the world and left nothing for the rest of us. They broke us. They took my family. She finally looked up at him, the tears she'd been fighting finally spilling over. Tracing clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. Why did you save me? She asked, her voice raw. So I can just drift to the next island and be captured by the next pirate. So I can die alone in some other storm. Quote. Naruto listened to every word, his blue eyes never leaving her face. He didn't offer empty platitudes or cheap reassurances. When she finished, a heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the gentle lapping of the waves. He saw it all in her. The fierce intelligence, the broken heart, the unyielding spirit that refused to be extinguished. He had seen that same fire in the eyes of his own comrades during the darkest days of war. He had felt it in himself when he had lost his master, when he had faced down gods and monsters who sought to impose their will upon the world. He had achieved peace in his world. He had become Hokage, united the nations, and built a future for the next generation. Then, a freak mission, a tear in the fabric of reality. And he had been pulled into this world of endless blue, of pirates and strange powers, a world groaning under the weight of its own corruption. He had been observing, learning, trying to find a way home. But hearing her story, seeing her despair, it struck a chord deep within him. He had not fought so hard to create a world of freedom only to stand by and watch another world drown in its own chains. The first rays of dawn broke through the clouds, painting the horizon in strokes of orange and pink. The light caught in his golden hair, making it blaze like a crown. He stood up, looking not at her, but out at the vast, open sea. Then the map is not the problem, he said, his voice quiet but ringing with absolute certainty. The world is. He turned back to face her. The weariness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a burning, resolute fire that seemed to heat the very air. This was the man who had obliterated a warship with a flick of his wrist. This was the gaze of a leader, a fighter, a king. Your dream is not a fantasy. He continued, his voice growing stronger with every word. It's the noblest goal I've heard since I arrived in this world. A world without hidden corners or dark seas, a world completely known. Completely charted, that is a world on the cusp of true freedom. But you're right, as it is now, this world is unworthy of your maps. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. He didn't kneel, he didn't offer a ring or a treasure. He offered a declaration, a vow that was so audacious, so utterly insane, it stole the air from her lungs. I will conquer this grand line for you, Nami. Her breath hitched. She stared at him, wide-eyed, trying to find a hint of a joke, a glimmer of madness. There was none. There was only the calm, unshakable conviction of a man stating a simple fact. Not for a throne, he said, his voice dropping, becoming more personal, more intense. Not for treasure. I have no interest in being a king. I will tear down the 4 emperors from their bloody thrones. I will dismantle the corrupt world government that allows slavery and suffering to fester under the banner of justice. I will shatter the cages. I will calm the storms. I will hunt the monsters. I will give you a world of open seas and clear skies. A world where you and anyone else can sail freely, without fear. I will give you a world worth mapping. He crouched down in front of her, bringing himself to her level. The rising sun framed him, creating a silhouette of impossible power and unwavering purpose. He extended his hand, palm up. It was the same hand. that had just unleashed unimaginable destruction, but now, it was just a hand, offered in a promise. Your charts will be the foundation of that new world, he said softly. But a navigator needs a heading. And a conqueror needs a compass. Let me be your strength. You be my guide. Help me give you the world you deserve. Silence. The sea was calm. The storm had passed. Nami looked from his outstretched hand to his piercing blue eyes. Her mind screamed that it was impossible. No one could challenge the entire world. No one could fight the emperors and the admirals at the same time. It was suicide. It was madness. But her heart, which had felt like a cold, dead stone in her chest for so long, began to beat again. A frantic, thunderous rhythm that echoed the storm that had just passed. He wasn't just offering her safety. He wasn't offering her pity. He was offering her vengeance. He was offering her hope. He was taking her broken, impossible dream and declaring it his new purpose. He wasn't proposing marriage in any way she understood. This was something far deeper, far more terrifying and exhilarating. It was a proposal of alliance, of purpose, of destiny. He was asking her to help him wage war on reality itself. Slowly, her trembling hand rose. She watched as her fingers, bruised and scraped, met his. His grip was gentle but firm, a silent seal on an impossible pact. The warmth from his hand spread up her arm, chasing away the last of the cold, chasing away the shadows that had haunted her for so long. For the first time since that terrible day, Nami felt a flicker of something she thought she had lost forever. It was a terrifying, brilliant, beautiful thing. It was hope. Okay, she whispered, her voice barely audible, but her grip on his hand was iron. Okay, Naruto. A genuine smile finally touched his lips, and it was as bright and brilliant as the dawn that was now breaking all around them. The world was still a dark and dangerous place, but for the first time, she felt like she had a heading. A new course was set. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The First Island, the First Alliance. The raft was a marvel of practicality and raw power. Naruto had formed it from the largest contiguous piece of the Slaver's shipwreck, reinforcing the wood with a subtle, shimmering layer of his own energy that made it unnaturally durable and buoyant. A simple mast stood at its center, holding a sail Nami had pieced together from salvaged canvas. It was not elegant, but it was swift. With Naruto feeding a controlled stream of wind into the sail, they made incredible time. For 3 days, they sailed under Nami's expert guidance. She navigated by the sun, the stars, and the subtle language of the currents, her instincts as sharp as ever. In that time, they spoke little of the past. Instead, Nami found herself explaining the world. She drew charts on spare pieces of wood, detailing the absurdities of the Grand Line, the magnetic fields that rendered normal compasses useless, the log poses that were their lifeline, the bizarre weather patterns and the islands where seasons changed in the blink of an eye. Naruto absorbed it all with an unnerving focus. He asked sharp, insightful questions not about the phenomena themselves, but about their strategic implications. How could the magnetic fields be manipulated? Could the unpredictable weather be weaponized? He looked at her world map not as a chart to be followed, but as a battlefield to be understood. It was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. She was giving him the knowledge to wage his impossible war, and he was taking it and forging it into a weapon. On the morning of the 4th day, a smudge of green appeared on the horizon. Mikan Island, Nami announced, her voice crisp and professional. She pointed to a spot on her makeshift chart. It's known for its groves, but it's small, out of the way. Not officially allied with the world government, which means no permanent marine base. A good place to resupply and gather information without drawing too much attention. As they drew closer, however, the idyllic image of a peaceful farming island began to sour. A crude, heavily armed ship was anchored in the natural harbor. Its flag a grinning skull impaled on a mess of rusted gears. The town clinging to the hillside looked tired. Buildings were in disrepair, their paint peeling. Groves of orange trees that covered the hills seemed neglected, many of them showing signs of disease or drought. The air itself felt heavy, thick with a silent, simmering resentment. They docked the raft at a crumbling pier, away from the main port. The few people they saw, gaunt-faced fishermen mending nets with listless hands, a woman hurrying down a cobbled street with her head down, scurried away from them. their eyes darting nervously towards the pirate ship in the harbor. There was no welcome here. Only fear. So much for a quiet stop, Nami muttered, her hand instinctively going to the Klima-tact strapped to her thigh. They're being squeezed, Naruto said, his gaze sweeping over the town. His senses, honed by years of tracking and sage mode, picked up more than just sights and sounds. He could feel the collective anxiety of the place, a low hum of misery that clung to the very stones. Let's find out by who. Nami's approach was methodical. She was the strategist, the information gatherer. While Naruto's sheer presence was like a beacon, she could slip through the cracks. She found a small, dingy tavern near the docks, the only one that seemed to be open. Inside, a handful of sullen locals nursed watered-down drinks, while a larger, louder group of pirates occupied the best tables. They were broad, grimy men, armed with an assortment of crude-looking swords and pistols, their laughter echoing with a cruel, proprietary edge. Nami took a seat at the bar, ordering a glass of water she had no intention of drinking. Naruto stood by the entrance, a silent, imposing figure in his white coat. Drawing curious and hostile glances. He ignored them, his attention seemingly fixed on the street outside, but Nami knew he was listening to every word, sensing every shift in the room's tense atmosphere. She didn't have to wait long. From the hushed, bitter whispers of the old men at the end of the bar and the boorish boasting of the pirates, she pieced the story together. The scrap pirates, led by a man named Captain Claw, had taken over the island 3 months ago. They'd consumed the town's food stores, imposed a crippling protection tax on every orange harvested, and enforced their rule with casual brutality. Claw himself was a devil fruit user, a man who could supposedly turn his limbs into weapons of twisted, rusted metal. Their base was the mayor's mansion on the hill, the finest house in town. Now a fortress of scrap metal and stolen timber. One of the pirates, a man with a jagged scar across his nose, slammed his mug down and swaggered over to Naruto. You got a problem, pretty boy. Staring at something, Naruto's head turned slowly, his calm blue eyes meeting the pirate's belligerent gaze. No problem, he said, his voice level. This is our island, the pirate sneered, poking a thick finger into Naruto's chest. You want to be here, you pay the tax. Or maybe that nice coat of yours will do. Nami tensed, her hand tightening on her staff. But Naruto didn't move a muscle. He simply looked down at the finger, then back up at the pirate's face. I don't think you want my coat, he said, and his voice was so devoid of fear, so full of quiet, absolute confidence, that the pirate actually hesitated. In that moment of hesitation, Naruto's eyes seemed to flash, and the pirate, along with his companions who had started to rise from their seats, suddenly felt a pressure in the air. It was a suffocating, terrifying weight, as if the gravity in the room had suddenly tripled, all of it focused directly on them. It was not a visible power, but a primal, instinctual warning. A whisper in the back of their minds that screamed, "Do not touch this man." The scarred pirate swallowed hard, a sheen of sweat breaking out on his brow. He slowly lowered his hand. Just watch yourself," he stammered, before turning and retreating back to his table, the bravado completely gone from his posture. The tavern fell silent. The locals stared, wide-eyed. Even the other pirates looked at Naruto with a new, grudging respect. Naruto simply turned his attention back to the street as if nothing had happened. Nami walked over to him, her heart still hammering in her chest. "Okay," she said in a low voice. "I've got it. Captain Claw, a devil fruit user. His officers are in the mansion with him. They have about 50 men in total, half on the ship, half in the town. Patrols are sloppy. Discipline is non-existent. They're bullies, not soldiers." "And the townspeople?" Naruto asked, terrified. "They won't fight. They've probably seen too many crews like this come and go." She looked at him, her eyes sharp and analytical. "A full frontal assault would work. You'd obviously win, but it would damage the town and probably get people hurt in the crossfire. We're here to liberate, not destroy. This needs to be clean." He nodded, a flicker of appreciation in his eyes. He understood immediately. This was her battlefield as much as his. "What's the plan, Navigator?" "The head of a snake," she said, a grim smile touching her lips. "You cut it off, and the body dies. Claw and his officers, take them out, and the rest of the crew will fold. They're based in the mansion on the hill. We hit them at dusk, when the patrols are changing and they're settled in for their evening meal. You go in alone, fast and quiet, no witnesses until it's over. It was a cold, efficient plan. And he agreed without a moment's hesitation. As dusk settled, casting long shadows across the neglected orange groves, a lone figure moved up the hill toward the mayor's mansion. The once elegant building was now a monstrosity, its windows boarded up and its walls reinforced with jagged sheets of rusted metal. 2 guards stood at the makeshift gate, leaning on their spears, bored and inattentive. They never saw him coming. One moment they were complaining about the dwindling ale supply, the next a flicker of gold moved between them and they were slumping to the ground. Unconscious before they even knew they were under attack. Naruto didn't break stride. He slipped through the gate like a ghost, his sage mode giving him a perfect, 3-dimensional map of the entire compound. He sensed 30 people inside, 25 in a large dining hall on the ground floor, their life signs boisterous and drunk. 5 more were in a room on the floor above, their signatures stronger, more alert. Claw in his inner circle. He bypassed the dining hall, scaling the outer wall with a single, chakra-fueled leap that carried him to the second-floor balcony. He moved with a silence that was absolute. The door was unlocked. Inside, the room was opulent, filled with stolen furniture and looted treasures. Captain Claw sat at the head of a large table, gnawing on a leg of roasted meat. He was a mountain of a man, with a thick, greasy beard and arms like tree trunks. His 4 lieutenants sat with him, laughing at some crude joke. "Did you hear something?" one of them asked, looking towards the balcony doors. "Just the wind, you idiot," Claw grunted, tossing a bone over his shoulder. "Now, as I was saying, tomorrow we start tearing down the west docks for firewood. Those villagers can swim to their damn boats for all I." He stopped. His head snapped up, his piggish eyes widening. He had finally sensed it. A presence in the room that hadn't been there a second before. Naruto stood by the doors. His arms crossed, his expression placid. He hadn't announced himself, but his sudden, silent appearance was more jarring than any shout. "Who the hell are you?" Claw roared, shoving his chair back as it scraped loudly against the floor. His lieutenants scrambled to their feet, drawing their weapons. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki," he said calmly. "Your rule over this island is over." The sheer arrogance of the statement made them laugh. "You hear that, boys? This one skinny whelp thinks he can take us on." Claw's own laughter was a booming, rattling sound. "I'm going to enjoy turning you into a pile of scrap." His right arm began to transform. Skin and muscle retracted, replaced by a churning, grinding mass of rusted gears, sharp metal plates, and twisted wires. The limb grew, extending into a vicious-looking clawed appendage that dripped oil onto the fine rug. He lunged, swinging the massive scrap metal claw in an arc that should have torn the room in half. Naruto didn't even seem to move. He simply tilted his head. The claw, moving with incredible force, passed right through the space where he had been standing. Claw's momentum carried him forward, and he stumbled, off balance. The lieutenants charged from all sides, a flurry of steel aimed at Naruto's back and flanks. What they saw was a blur of gold. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. "Oh, nay!" of the pirates cried out and crumpled, a precise chop to the back of his neck rendering him unconscious. Another found his sword arm seized in an unbreakable grip, followed by a disorienting spin a sharp impact that sent him crashing into a third man, both of them collapsing in a heap. The 4th and final lieutenant swung his axe wildly, only to have it stop dead, caught in Naruto's open palm. The pirate stared, his eyes wide with disbelief, as Naruto's fingers tightened, crushing the thick steel axe head into a crumpled ball of metal as if it were paper. A single, gentle push sent the terrified man tumbling unconscious to the floor. It had taken less than 3 seconds. Claw stared, his devil fruit-enhanced arm trembling. The fear he hadn't felt in years was a cold knot in his stomach. This wasn't a fight. This was an execution. What are you?" he stammered, backing away. Naruto didn't answer. His right hand came up, and in his palm, the air began to swirl. A high-pitched, whining shriek filled the room as a sphere of pure, compressed wind energy spun into existence. It was a perfect, beautiful, terrifying thing. a miniature hurricane held in his hand. "This is a Rasengan," Naruto said, his voice still unnervingly calm. "And it's the last thing you'll see as the ruler of this island." He moved. He didn't run. He simply closed the distance between them in an instant. Claw brought up his scrap metal arm to defend himself, a desperate, futile gesture. The Rasengan met the metal knot with a clang, but with a grinding, shattering roar. The devil fruit-enhanced limb was obliterated, the metal and gears disintegrating under the spiraling force. The sphere slammed into Claw's chest, and the pirate captain was launched backwards as if shot from a cannon. He crashed through the far wall of the mansion, the sound of splintering wood and stone echoing through the night, before landing in a heap in the courtyard below, his armor shattered, his body broken, but alive. Utterly, and completely defeated. Downstairs, the 25 pirates in the dining hall had heard the commotion. They poured out into the courtyard, weapons drawn, their drunken confusion turning to shock as they saw their captain lying broken amidst the rubble of the mansion wall. And then they saw Naruto, standing in the jagged hole Claw had created, framed by the moonlight, not a scratch on him. The silent, unconscious forms of their 4 strongest officers were visible in the room behind him. Fear, cold and absolute, descended upon them. They had built their lives around the idea that their captain was invincible. And this one man had just broken him, and his lieutenants, in less than a minute. Naruto leapt down into the courtyard, landing softly on the grass. He looked at the assembled pirates, his blue eyes sweeping over their terrified faces. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. "Your captain has been defeated," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the yard. "You have 2 choices. Swear your loyalty to me, and help me rebuild what you have broken. Or take your ship and leave this island now. If you ever return, I will not be this merciful. Choose." From the shadows of a nearby alley, the townspeople who had been drawn by the noise watched, their hearts in their throats. They expected a bloodbath. They expected a new tyrant to replace the old one. They did not expect this. The pirates looked at each other, then at their broken captain, then back at the man who stood before them, radiating an aura of power unlike anything they had ever felt. There was no real choice. One by one, they began to drop their weapons, the clatter of steel on stone, the sound of a regime collapsing. The next morning, the people of Myken Island awoke to a miracle. Hundreds of identical golden-haired men were swarming over their town. They were repairing roofs, rebuilding the shattered docks, clearing the diseased trees from the groves, and replanting saplings. They moved with a silent, tireless efficiency that was both incredible and deeply unsettling. The shadow clones worked without rest, their combined efforts accomplishing weeks of labor in a matter of hours. Il Naruto's clones handled the physical reconstruction. Nami took charge of the social one. She found the town's terrified mayor, a stout man named Hachi, hiding in his cellar. She didn't threaten him. She laid out a ledger she'd recovered from the mansion, detailing the scrap pirates' extortion. Then she laid out a new plan. A plan for fair trade, for a citizen-led defense force, for rebuilding the town's economy. "We aren't here to rule you," she explained, her voice firm and clear as she stood in the mayor's dusty office. "We're here to offer an alliance. We liberated your island. In return, you will be the first port of call for a new fleet. A fleet dedicated to liberating every island like this one across the Grand Line." Hachi was skeptical. "You're still pirates," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "We are," Nami admitted, her gaze unwavering. "But we are not here to plunder. We're here to change the world that allows men like Claw to exist." Her belief in the words, in the man who had made the promise, was so absolute that it was contagious. The proof was happening right outside his window. By midday, the town was already visibly transformed. The fear that had choked the streets was gone, replaced by a buzzing, hopeful energy as the villagers began to work alongside the clones and the now subdued pirates. Nami stood on the newly repaired main dock, directing the refitting of the scrapper. Claw's former ship, the crude skull flag, had been torn down. She was already redesigning the sails. A handful of the former scrap pirates, the ones who had shown skill in carpentry and rigging, were working under her command. They followed her orders with a mixture of fear and awe. She was just a young woman, but she commanded with the unshakable authority of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Naruto appeared beside her, the last of his clones dispelling in a puff of smoke. He looked out at the bustling town, at the people working together, at the ship being repurposed for their own journey. "You're a natural leader, Nami," he said quietly. "I'm just good at telling people what to do," she replied without looking at him, a faint blush on her cheeks. "Someone has to organize this chaos." He smiled. "That's what a leader does." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the birth of their revolution. It wasn't a grand army or a powerful nation. It was one small, forgotten island, a captured ship, and a crew of about 30 defeated pirates who had sworn loyalty out of fear and were slowly beginning to feel a flicker of something else. It was a tiny beginning. But it was a beginning. He had conquered his first island for her. Not with fire and blood, but with a surgical strike and a miraculous act of creation. He hadn't installed himself as a king. He had removed a tyrant and given the people back their freedom, earning their loyalty in the process. He was keeping his promise. Nami looked from the ship to the revitalized town, and then to the man standing beside her. The sea breeze caught his white coat, making it billow behind him like the cape of a hero. A real hero. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that his impossible promise might not be so impossible after all. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Ghost of the Marines. Their new ship, rechristened the Whirlwind, was not elegant, but it was solid. Under Nami's command, the former scrap pirates had stripped away the garish metal plating, repaired the hull, and outfitted it with new sails. It was now a functional, if ugly, vessel of war. The 30 crewmen, now wearing simple clothes instead of their pirate rags, moved with a nervous, disciplined energy. They were still terrified of Naruto, but they were also beginning to feel a strange sense of pride. For the first time in their lives, they were part of something that wasn't just about looting and terror. They were the first soldiers of a new era, even if they didn't quite understand what that meant yet. Word traveled fast on the seas. Rumors of a man who could command the wind, who had single-handedly dismantled a pirate crew and rebuilt a town in a day, were spreading like wildfire from island to island. The world government had not yet issued a bounty, but eyes were turning their way. 2 weeks after leaving Mikan Island, Nami stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The weather had been unusually calm, a sign in the grand line that something terrible was about to happen. "Ship off the starboard bow." The lookout, a young man named Pip, called down from the crow's nest. His voice quavered. It's a marine warship." Nami brought her binoculars to her eyes. Sure enough, the sleek, white hull of a standard marine battleship was cutting through the water, the seagulls and globe symbol emblazoned on its massive sails. It was not a patrol ship. It was a hunter. And on its bow, standing amidst a swirl of white smoke, was a figure she recognized from reports and nightmares alike. "Vice Admiral Smoker," Nami said, her voice tight. "A Logia user. Smoke fruit. He's relentless, and he wields a jute tipped with seastone. He's not like the local garrisons. This is serious." She looked at Naruto, who was leaning against the railing, watching the approaching ship with a calm, almost bored expression. "Battle stations," Nami ordered, her voice ringing out across the deck. The crew scrambled, loading the cannons, drawing their weapons. Fear was palpable, but they didn't run. That was progress. "Hold your fire," Naruto said, his voice low but carrying effortlessly. The crew froze. He pushed off the railing and walked to the bow of the Whirlwind. "Let them come." The marine ship pulled alongside them, its cannons manned and aimed. Smoker, with 2 cigars clenched between his teeth, glared across the water. Beside him stood Captain Tashigi, her hand on the hilt of her sword. "Heave to and prepare to be boarded." Smoker bellowed, his voice gravelly and authoritative. "By the authority of the world government, you are under arrest for acts of piracy and the illegal seizure of a vessel." Naruto didn't move. He simply looked at Smoker. "We have committed no acts of piracy. We liberated an island from pirates and claimed their ship as spoils of war. The people of Mikan are free because of us. You are flying no flag, you have no papers, and you are commanding a crew of known criminals," Smoker retorted, smoke billowing from his shoulders. "That makes you a pirate. And I don't make deals with pirates." "I'm not asking for a deal," Naruto said. "I'm giving you a choice." Smoker scowled. He was used to pirates who ran, pirates who fought, pirates who begged. He was not used to pirates who stood on the deck of a captured ship and lectured him. Tashigi, prepare a boarding party, Smoker ordered. I'll handle the captain. His lower body dissolved into a thick plume of white smoke, propelling him across the gap between the ships. He landed on the deck of the Whirlwind with a heavy thud, reforming instantly. He didn't hesitate. He lunged at Naruto, his seastone-tipped jute aiming for a disabling blow to the shoulder. It was a streak that had taken down hundreds of pirates, including devil fruit users who found their powers useless against the seastone. Naruto didn't dodge. He didn't block. He simply raised his hand and caught the tip of the jute in his palm. Smoker's eyes widened. The weapon, designed to drain the strength of any power user, had no effect. Naruto held it as effortlessly as if it were a twig. Seastone, Naruto noted, examining the weapon with mild interest. Useless against me. I don't get my power from a fruit. Smoker grunted and transformed his arm into smoke, attempting to flow around Naruto's guard and strike him from behind. But before the smoke could fully form, Naruto's other hand moved. It was a blur. He grabbed Smoker by the front of his jacket, his grip like a steel vice. With a simple, fluid motion, he slammed the vice admiral onto the deck. The impact shook the entire ship. Wood splintered. Smoker gasped, the air driven from his lungs. He tried to turn into smoke to escape, but he couldn't. Naruto's hand was glowing with a faint, orange light, chakra. It was disrupting Smoker's ability to control his Logia form, pinning him in his solid state. Tashigi and the boarding party, who had just landed on the deck, froze in horror. Their invincible commander had been subdued in a single move. Naruto didn't follow up with another attack. He didn't strike the fallen marine. He just held him there, looking down at him with eyes that held no malice, only a profound, weary disappointment. Is this your justice, Smoker? Naruto asked quietly, blindly following orders, arresting those who fight the battles you won't. Smoker glared up at him, struggling against the unbreakable grip. Justice is the law. Without the law, there is only chaos. Pirates like you are the source of that chaos. I saw your law on Mikan Island, Naruto said. There was no marine base there. No protection. Just people suffering under a tyrant while the world government looked the other way because the island wasn't important enough to tax. Where was your justice then? Smoker fell silent. It was a truth he knew all too well. The world government protected its own interests, its allied nations. The rest of the world was left to rot. I am not a pirate who seeks to plunder, Naruto continued, his voice gaining strength. I am here to break the cycle. To tear down the emperors, to expose the corruption of the government. And to build a world where people don't need your protection, because they are free. He released his grip and stepped back. Smoker sat up, coughing, rubbing his chest. He looked at Naruto, really looked at him for the first time. He didn't see the avarice of a pirate. He saw conviction. He saw power that terrified him, not because it was evil, but because it was absolute. You're talking about war with the entire world, Smoker rasped, standing up slowly. You're just one man. Naruto smiled, and for a second, Smoker saw a flash of something ancient and terrible in his eyes. I am not alone, and I have made a promise. He glanced back at Nami, who was watching him with a mixture of awe and fierce pride. Naruto turned back to Smoker. In his right hand, a Rasengan formed. But this was not the small, controlled sphere he had used against Claw. He poured more chakra into it. It grew, expanding until it was larger than him, a roaring, swirling sun of pure, destructive energy that illuminated the sea for miles. The wind from its rotation whipped their clothes and hair, tearing at the sails of both ships. The sheer pressure of it made the very air tremble. The Marines on the warship cried out in terror, backing away from the railings. Even Tashigi took an involuntary step back, her face pale. Smoker stood his ground, but his cigar fell from his mouth. This was not the power of a pirate. This was the power to erase an island. I could destroy your ship, Smoker, Naruto said, his voice calm over the roar of the Rasengan. I could kill every man on board in a heartbeat. But I won't, because you're not the enemy. You're just a good man serving a broken system. He let the Rasengan dissipate. The silence that followed was deafening. Go, Naruto said. Go back to your headquarters. Tell them what you saw. Tell them a new era is coming. And tell them if they stand in the way of true freedom, they will fall. Smoker stared at him for a long moment. His sense of justice, rigid and absolute for so long, was cracking. He had been spared by a man who had the power of a god, a man who spoke of justice with more conviction than any admiral he had ever met. He turned to Tashigi and his men. Back to the ship, he ordered, his voice gruff. But sir, Tashigi started. I said, back to the ship. Smoker roared. The Marines retreated, confused and terrified. Smoker turned back to Naruto one last time. The world government won't ignore this, he warned. You've just put a target on your back that every Marine, every bounty hunter, and every cipher pole agent will be aiming for. Let them aim, Naruto said. I'm not hiding. Smoker turned into smoke and flew back to his ship. The warship turned slowly and began to sail away. No shots were fired. It was a retreat, plain and simple. On the deck of the Whirlwind, the crew erupted into cheers. They had faced a Marine vice admiral and won without firing a single cannon. Nami walked up to Naruto. Her heart was pounding, not from fear, but from adrenaline and something else. She had watched him dismantle a man she had once feared, not with violence, but with ideals and a display of power that was an act of mercy. You let him go, she said. He's not a bad man, Naruto replied, watching the Marine ship disappear over the horizon. Just lost. Killing him wouldn't change anything. But showing him that there's another way, that might plant a seed. A seed of what? Doubt, Naruto said. And from doubt, change can grow. He turned to her, his blue eyes serious. But he was right. The easy part is over. Now, the world knows we're here. We need a real ship, Nami. This tub won't survive the new world, let alone a war. Nami nodded, pulling out her charts. Her fingers traced a line to a bustling island city known throughout the world. Water 7, she said. The city of water, home to the best shipwrights in the world. If anyone can build us a ship worthy of conquering the Grand Line, it's them. Naruto looked at the course she had plotted. Water 7 it is. Set the course, navigator. As the whirlwind turned, catching the wind, Nami looked at Naruto's back. He had challenged the Marines, not with a declaration of war, but a declaration of ideology. He was fighting a battle on a level she was only just beginning to understand. And she was right there with him, guiding the way. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Water 7. The approach to Water 7 was like sailing into a dream. The city rose from the ocean on colossal stilts, a multi-layered marvel of fountains, canals, and towering structures. All interconnected by a web of bridges and waterways. Giant, bubble-like elevators ferried citizens between levels, and the main thoroughfares were not streets but wide canals plied by Yagara bulls, strange, frog-like creatures that served as the city's primary mode of transport. The air hummed with the sound of hammers on steel, the shouts of shipwrights, and the constant, soothing rush of water. It was a city alive, a testament to humanity's ability to thrive in even the most improbable of settings. But as the whirlwind navigated the outer channels, a different kind of hum became apparent. The people of Water 7 were boisterous and open, but as their ship passed, conversations would quiet. Heads would turn, whispers followed in their wake like a second tide. Naruto and Nami had a reputation that had preceded them, a chaotic mix of fact and terrified fantasy. That's them, a merchant muttered to his customer, his eyes wide. The ones who faced down Smoker the White Hunter. I heard the captain is a golden demon who can walk on water, a woman whispered, pulling her child closer. They say he commands the storms themselves. And the woman, another added, his gaze fixed on Nami at the helm. They say she's a witch who can read the sea's mind. She navigates without a log pose, and her orders are never wrong. The rumors painted them as mythological monsters, figures of impossible power. It was a useful reputation, but a dangerous one. It inspired awe, but it did not inspire trust. And in Water 7, trust was the only currency that truly mattered. The shipwrights of the Galila Company were the best in the world. They built ships for merchants, pirates, and even the world government. They were pragmatic artisans who valued skill and reputation above all else. And they would not build a flagship for a ghost story. They're afraid of us, Nami observed, her hand steady on the ship's wheel. Fear doesn't build alliances. No, Naruto agreed, his gaze sweeping over the city, his senses taking in the undercurrent of anxiety. But respect does. And sometimes, fear is the first step towards respect. Let them whisper. Our actions will speak louder. Nami docked the ship at a public pier, leaving the crew with strict orders to behave and stay on board. She had exchanged her navigator's gear for a more professional, though still practical, outfit. She was no longer just the ship's navigator, she was its diplomat. Naruto, in his simple black attire and white coat, stood beside her, his quiet presence a stark contrast to the legend swirling around him. He was the unspoken threat, the power that backed her words. Their destination was Dock 1, the headquarters of the Galila Company and the office of its president and the city's mayor, the legendary shipwright Iceberg. The main office was a hive of activity. Shipwrights covered in sawdust and grease shouted orders, blueprints were spread across massive tables, and the air was TCK with the smell of fresh cut wood and hot metal. They were met by a petite woman with dark hair and glasses. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but guarded. It was Khalifa, Iceberg's secretary. "We have a business proposal for Mayor Iceberg," Nami said, her voice cool and confident. "My name is Nami. This is my captain, Naruto Uzumaki." The names dropped like stones into a quiet pond. He buzzing activity in the room faltered. Khalifa's professional demeanor didn't slip, but her eyes flickered with a brief, sharp assessment. "The mayor is a very busy man," she said. "I'm sure he is," Nami replied, meeting her gaze without flinching. "But I doubt he's too busy to discuss the construction of a vessel that will change the balance of power on the Grand Line. Tell him we're prepared to pay any price. In cash." The mention of money, and the sheer audacity of her statement, was enough. Khalifa excused herself and disappeared into an office at the back. A few moments later, she returned. "The mayor will see you." Iceberg was not what Nami expected. He was a tall, lanky man with blue hair and a perpetually sleepy expression. He sat behind a large, cluttered desk, a small mouse peeking out from his shirt pocket. He looked more like a tired academic than the leader of the world's greatest shipbuilding enterprise. But his eyes, when they met theirs, were sharp and incredibly intelligent. "So," Iceberg began, steepling his fingers, "you're the source of all the commotion. The ghost and the witch. Your arrival has the world government officials in this city in quite a panic. We're not here to cause trouble for your city, Mayor Iceberg," Nami said, taking the lead. Naruto remained standing by the door, a silent guardian, letting her command the room. "We're here as customers. We need a ship." "Everyone needs a ship," Iceberg said with a dismissive wave. "Galila has a 2-year waiting list for custom builds." "We don't need a custom build," Nami countered. "We need a warship. The strongest, fastest, most durable vessel you can possibly conceive. A ship capable of weathering any storm, outrunning any fleet, and fighting an emperor on his own terms. We need a flagship for a revolution." Iceberg's sleepy expression sharpened. "That's a bold claim. Talk like that is treason. Why should I risk the reputation of my company and the safety of my city to build a ship or a pirate crew with delusions of grandeur?" "Because we're not just another pirate crew," Nami said, leaning forward slightly. She unrolled a sea chart on his desk, not of a route, but of influence. Mykan Island was circled, marked with a new symbol. "We don't plunder. We liberate. The old powers are failing. The world government can't protect its people, and the emperors only offer tyranny. A new age is coming, Mayor. You can either watch it happen from your docks, or you can build the vessel that leads the charge. This isn't just a commission, it's an investment in a future where cities yours don't have to bow to the whims of corrupt nobles or insane pirates." Her words hung in the air, filled with a conviction that was undeniable. Iceberg looked from her fiery gaze to the silent man by the door. He could feel the power radiating from Naruto, a calm, bottomless ocean of strength that made the stories seem less like fantasy and more like understatement. Building a ship of that magnitude, it would require atom wood, Iceberg mused, testing them. The rarest, most expensive timber in the world. The cost would be astronomical. Hundreds of millions of berry. Nami didn't blink. She slid a heavy, locked briefcase onto the desk. "There are 300 million berry in there. It's a down payment. The rest will be paid upon completion." Iceberg stared at the case, then back at them. He was a pragmatist. A businessman. But he was also a man who loved his city, a man who had seen the dark side of the world government's operations firsthand. He was intrigued, and he was cautious. Your proposal is compelling, he admitted slowly, but I cannot give you an answer right now. An alliance of this nature requires careful consideration. Enjoy your stay in Water 7. I will have my decision by tomorrow. As they left the docks and walked through the city's vibrant, water-laced streets, Naruto spoke. He's hiding something. I know, Nami agreed. He was testing us. The world government. He knows more than he's letting on. But he's considering it. We planted the seed. We're being watched, Naruto added, his gaze flicking to a shadowed rooftop 2 blocks away. 5 of them. They're good. Almost silent. But they're there. Nami's hand tightened on her klima tact. Marines. Or something else. Something else, Naruto said, a dangerous glint in his eyes. They feel cold, like tools. Let them watch. They'll make their move when they think we're vulnerable. Their move came that night. The target was not Naruto or Nami. It was Iceberg. The mayor was working late in his office, poring over blueprints, when the shadows in his room seemed to deepen and coalesce. 5 figures appeared as if from nowhere, their movements unnaturally fast and silent. They wore masks, but their bespoke suits marked them as government agents. The tallest of them, a man with a pigeon perched on his shoulder, stepped forward. Iceberg, Rob Lucci said, his voice a low, chilling purr. By order of the world government, you are to cease all contact with the pirate Naruto Uzumaki. To ensure your compliance, and to send a message to these new upstarts, your life is forfeit. Your death will be blamed on them. A tragic accident during a failed extortion attempt. Iceberg's eyes widened, but before he could even call for help, Lucci's finger shot out, hardening like steel. Shigen. The attack never landed. A flash of gold filled the room. Naruto appeared between Lucci and Iceberg, his hand wrapped around Lucci's extended finger. The assassin's unstoppable killing technique was halted by a simple grip. Shock, pure and unadulterated, registered on Lucci's face for the first time in his life. He felt an impossible strength in that grip, a power that completely neutralized his own. I don't like it when people try to kill potential business partners, Naruto said, his voice dangerously soft. The other 4 agents reacted instantly. Kaku leapt into the air, his legs a blur as he unleashed a series of flying, blade-like kicks. Rankyaku. The compressed air scythed towards Naruto. Naruto didn't even turn around. He simply raised his free hand, and a wall of wind, a small, controlled version of the gale he could unleash, formed behind him. The air blades dissipated harmlessly against it. Bluno, the large agent with horns, slammed his hands on the air, creating a shimmering doorway. Retreat. Regroup, he yelled, realizing in an instant that their intelligence had been catastrophically wrong. This wasn't a man. This was a monster. No one is leaving, Naruto said. He tightened his grip on Lucci's finger, and there was a sickening crack. Lucci let out a strangled gasp of pain. Naruto then shoved him back, sending him stumbling into the other agents. He moved. It wasn't the impossible speed of Soru, it was something beyond it. He simply ceased to be in one place and appeared in another. He appeared before Bluno just as the agent was stepping through his air door. Instead of attacking Bluno, Naruto grabbed the edge of the shimmering dimensional portal itself. With a grunt of effort, he tore it. The portal shattered like glass, the pieces dissolving into nothing. Bluno stared, his mind unable to comprehend what had just happened. His unbreakable devil fruit ability had just been ripped apart by raw, physical force. A precise chop to the back of his neck sent him slumping to the floor. Unconscious, Kaku and Jabra came at him from both sides, their movements a blur. Khalifa stood back, preparing to use her devil fruit abilities. It was a perfect, coordinated attack by the most elite assassination unit the world government possessed. It was useless. Naruto sidestepped Jabra's attack, his hand lashing out and striking a pressure point on the wolfman's shoulder, paralyzing the entire right side of his body. He spun, catching Kaku's leg mid-kick, and with a simple, effortless twist, threw him into the ceiling with enough force to embed him in the plaster. Only Lucci and Khalifa remained. Lucci, cradling his broken finger, his eyes burning with a killer's rage, transformed. His body contorted and grew, sprouting fur, claws, and a tail. His hybrid leopard form was the pinnacle of zone power and Rokushiki mastery. I will tear you apart. He roared. He lunged, a living engine of destruction. Naruto just sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. You call this power? He murmured. He held up a single finger. A tiny, dense ball of wind chakra, no bigger than a marble, spun at its tip. He flicked it. The marble of wind struck Lucci in the chest. It didn't explode. It drilled. The leopard man's charge came to a dead stop. He looked down and saw a perfectly circular hole in his chest. Not a deep wound, but enough force to feel like he'd been hit by a cannonball. The impact sent him flying backward, crashing through the wall into the main workshop, where he landed in a heap, his transformation failing as he fell unconscious. Naruto turned his gaze to the last agent, Khalifa, who stood frozen, her mind unable to process the systematic, effortless demolition of CP9. Are you going to try and fight, too? He asked, his voice gentle. She shook her head, a single, terrified motion. Good choice, Naruto said. He walked past her and knelt by the unconscious form of Bluno. He placed a hand on the agent's head. I could kill you all right now. It would be easy, but I want you to take a message back to your masters. Tell them their shadows and their assassins don't frighten me. Tell them their games are over. Tell them I am coming for the throne they hide behind. And tell them that I will not be stopped. He stood up and looked at Iceberg, who had watched the entire fight, the entire execution, with wide, disbelieving eyes. I believe you have your decision. Mayor, Naruto said, his tone shifting back to one of calm business. Iceberg stared at the hole in his wall, at the unconscious forms of the government's most feared killers. And at the man who had defeated them in less than 30 seconds without breaking a sweat. The whispers and rumors hadn't been exaggerations. They had been understatements. This man didn't just command storms. He was the storm, and he had just protected him. He had protected Water 7. A slow smile spread across Iceberg's face, a genuine smile of excitement and dawning realization. Yes, he said, his voice filled with a newfound energy. Yes, I do. You won't just get a ship, Uzumaki. You'll get a masterpiece. We will build you the Thousand Sunny, a vessel of legend. We will build you the ship that will carry you to the dawn of a new world. The alliance was forged, not with gold, but with a demonstration of overwhelming power and a promise of protection. Water 7 had chosen its side. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Emperor's Shadow. The sounds of construction became the new rhythm of their lives. For months, Water 7 was a city possessed by a single, fervent purpose, the creation of a legend. The Galila Company, under the direct, obsessive supervision of Iceberg and the boisterous energy of his foreman, worked day and night. The skeleton of the ship rose from the waters of Dock 1. A magnificent structure built from the legendary Atom wood, its timbers glowing with a faint, warm light, promising a durability that could withstand the apocalypse. Nami was in her element. She was a constant presence at the dock, her sea charts and blueprints spread across a makeshift table. She argued with the foreman over the angle of the main mast for optimal wind capture, design. A revolutionary internal irrigation system for her Mikan trees, and consulted with Iceberg on the precise placement of the ship's cannons and the experimental propulsion system he called the coup de burst. She was not merely a customer. She was a collaborator, her genius for navigation and weather prediction being woven into the very soul of the ship. Naruto, for his part, became a quiet, constant presence. He trained his new crew, the former scrap pirates, with a patience that belied his power. He didn't teach them to fight like him, he taught them to fight as a unit, to trust each other. To find a strength they never knew they possessed. He would spend hours just watching the shipwrights, a small smile on his face. He was watching a dream take shape, the physical manifestation of his promise to her. Their presence had created a strange bubble of peace around the city. The world government, reeling from the silent, humiliating defeat of CP9, seemed to be holding its breath. No admirals came, no new assassins appeared. It was a cold, tense silence, the kind that precedes a hurricane. The news arrived, as it always did, on the wings of a news coup. Nami was reviewing the final schematics for the helm when the bird dropped the morning paper on her table. The headline, stark and bold, made the blood run cold in her veins. Kaido's fleet mobilizes. Led performer Jack the Drought on the warpath. The article was sparse on details, filled mostly with panicked speculation, but the implication was clear. One of the four emperors, the monstrous Kaido, ruler of the beast pirates, had taken notice of them. He was not sending a subordinate or a small task force. He was sending one of his 3 right-hand men, the All-Stars. Jack the Drought, a man with a bounty of over 1 billion berry. A man infamous for his cruelty and his seemingly indestructible body. He's coming here, Nami said, her voice a low, tight wire. Naruto, who had been meditating on the half-finished deck of their new ship, opened his eyes. He had already heard her heart skip a beat. Let him come, Naruto said, his voice calm, but his eyes were hard. It was only a matter of time before one of them tested us. Better to break the biggest bully in the schoolyard first. It sends a message. The sky began to change 3 days later. The brilliant blue of Water 7's perpetual summer day began to curdle, turning a sickly, bruised gray. The sea, usually so placid within the city's breakwaters, grew choppy and agitated. Nami stood on the highest scaffold of Dock 1, her hair whipping in the unnaturally cold wind. This wasn't a storm. This was an omen. On the horizon, they appeared. A fleet of iron-clad monstrosities, their prows shaped like the skulls of monstrous beasts, their sails black and tattered. They were less like ships and more like brutal, floating fortresses, bristling with cannons and spewing thick, black smoke into the sky. At their head was a ship of truly colossal size, a floating mountain of iron and pain named the Mammoth. On its prow stood a figure of terrifying proportions. Jack the Drought was a giant of a man, easily twice the height of a normal person, his muscles coiled like massive ropes. A fearsome metal jaw was bolted to the lower half of his face, and 2 massive, curved horns jutted from his back, clearly from the mammoth ivory he was so fond of. He radiated an aura of pure, unrelenting violence. So that's the little nest of bugs that's been buzzing on my territory, Jack's voice boomed across the water, amplified by a den mushi. It was a sound like rocks grinding together. Hand over the golden-haired man and the orange-haired witch. Do this, and I will only burn half your city to the ground as a lesson. Iceberg stood beside Nami, his face pale but resolute. The shipwrights of Galila had armed themselves with whatever they could find: hammers, massive wrenches, nail guns. They were shipwrights, not soldiers, but they would not abandon their allies. This is our fight, Nami said to him, her eyes never leaving the approaching fleet. Don't throw your lives away. We built that ship with you, Iceberg retorted, gesturing to the nearly complete vessel behind them. Her soul is part of this city now. We don't abandon our own. Nami's heart swelled with a fierce pride. This was what Naruto had been building. Not just a fleet, but a coalition of free people. She turned to the small crew of the Whirlwind and the foreman of Galila. Listen up, she commanded, her voice cutting through the rising wind. A direct fight is suicide. Their ships are bigger. Their cannons have a longer range. We fight smart. Polly, Kaku, get the Yagara bulls. We're going to tow the Whirlwind and our smaller ships into the main canals. We'll use the city itself as our weapon. Lure them into the narrow waterways, create bottlenecks. Don't engage, harass and retreat. We're buying time. Buying time for what? Yelled one of the crew. Nami glanced at Naruto, who was now standing on the bow of their new ship, the Thousand Sunny. He gave her a single, confident nod. For the storm to break, she said, a grim smile on her face. The battle for Water 7 began. It was a chaotic, brilliant display of guerrilla naval warfare. Nami, from her command post on the scaffold, was a maestro conducting a symphony of chaos. The smaller, more maneuverable ships, led by the Whirlwind, darted out from the canals, peppering the massive beast pirate ships with cannon fire before retreating back into the labyrinthine waterways of the city where the larger vessels could not follow. Jack grew enraged. He ordered his ships to fire indiscriminately into the city, sending cannonballs crashing into the beautiful architecture. But his fleet was too large, too cumbersome. They were a sledgehammer trying to swat a fly. They're getting frustrated, Nami observed, watching Jack's flagship, the Mammoth, try to force its way into the main channel, getting wedged between 2 large buildings. Now, Naruto, who had been waiting patiently, raised a hand. The sea around the mammoth began to churn violently. From the depths, massive waterspouts erupted, slamming against the hull of the ironclad ship, spinning it around, and forcing it back out into the open bay. The beast pirates stared in terror as the sea itself seemed to turn against them. "He really can command the ocean," Polly whispered, his cigar falling from his mouth. "That's not all he can do," Nami said. "Naruto, give me cover." Naruto formed a familiar hand sign. A dense, thick fog began to roll in from the sea, a creation of his chakra that was far more impenetrable than any natural mist. It enveloped the entire bay, reducing visibility to near zero. The beast pirate fleet was thrown into chaos, their ships bumping into each other, their crews shouting in confusion. Under the cover of the fog, the whirlwind sailed silently, a ghost ship on a gray sea. Nami used a combination of near age tempo and the thick fog to create illusory copies of her ship, drawing the enemy's fire and luring them towards the most treacherous reefs and currents at the edge of the bay. The sounds of earring hulls and panicked screams echoed through the mist. Jack roared in frustration. This was not the battle he had envisioned. He was being humiliated, outmaneuvered by a navigator and a man who played with the weather. "Enough," he bellowed, his voice shaking the very foundations of the city. "If I can't sail to you, I will walk." He leapt from the deck of the mammoth. He landed in the water with a tremendous splash. But he did not sink. He was a fish man, able to breathe underwater. He began to march towards the city, a relentless engine of destruction. But then his body began to change. It grew, twisted, covered in thick, brown, shaggy hide. His arms thickened into massive legs, his head elongated, and two colossal tusks sprouted from his jaw. In seconds, the man was gone, replaced by a full-sized, prehistoric mammoth. He was a walking mountain of muscle and rage, and he was heading directly for Dock 1. The ground shook with each of his thunderous steps. The shipwrights fired their nail guns and threw their tools, the projectiles bouncing harmlessly off his thick hide. He was unstoppable. He raised his massive trunk to deliver a blow that would shatter the dock and their unfinished ship along with it. And then, he was stopped. A flash of gold. Naruto appeared in front of the mammoth, a single, small figure against a beast of impossible scale. He held up one hand, and caught the descending trunk. A shockwave erupted from the point of impact, cracking the stone of the pier and sending a spray of water 50 feet into the air. The mammoth's titanic blow, a strike that could shatter a mountain, had been halted by one man. Jack, in his mammoth form, stared down with disbelieving eyes. "You are strong," Naruto said, his voice level, though the muscles in his arm were straining. He was in sage mode, the orange pigmentation around his eyes a stark contrast to his calm expression. "But you rely on brute force alone. You have no grace, no control." With a roar, Naruto pushed. He didn't just stop the mammoth, he drove it back. The colossal beast stumbled, its massive feet kicking up chunks of the pier. "Impossible." Jack's voice rumbled from the mammoth's throat. "Nothing can withstand my strength. I am indestructible." He charged, a living battering ram aimed at a single, immovable point. Naruto didn't move to meet him. Instead, his hands blurred through a series of signs. He held one hand out, and a Rasengan formed, but black, malevolent energy swirled into it from his other hand. It was the chakra of the Nine Tails, Kurama, mixing with his own. The sphere of wind transformed, becoming a miniature star of black and purple energy, a tailed beast bomb held in his palm. He then did something more. Wind chakra, impossibly sharp, began to spin around the dark sphere, forming four massive, blade-like points. A Rasenshuriken, fused with the power of a Biju. The tailed beast bomb Rasenshuriken shrieked, a sound that tore at the very air, a sound of utter annihilation. "You claim to be indestructible," Naruto said, his eyes glowing with a mixture of his own sage energy and Kurama's crimson power. "Let's test that theory." He threw it. The black shuriken flew through the air, not with incredible speed, but with an inexorable purpose. Jack, confident in his legendary durability, tried to swat it away with his tusk. The moment the tusk touched the spinning blades of wind, it disintegrated. The shuriken slammed into the mammoth's massive chest and erupted. It was not a simple explosion. It was an implosion followed by a cataclysmic blast. A dome of black energy expanded. Silent for a terrifying second, before it detonated outwards. The sound was a physical blow that shattered every window in the city. The sea itself was blasted away, creating a momentary crater in the bay. The shockwave tore through the fog, clearing it in an instant, revealing the terrified faces of the beast pirates on their ships. When the light faded, the pier was gone. A massive, gouged-out section of Water 7's foundation was simply missing. The sea rushed back in to fill the void with a deafening roar. And in the center of the devastation, half submerged in the churning water, was Jack. His mammoth form was gone. He was back in his human shape, his clothes shredded, his body covered in 1,000 tiny wounds from the microscopic wind blades. His prized metal jaw was shattered, and his eyes were wide with the vacant stare of absolute defeat. The myth of his indestructibility was broken. A profound silence fell over the bay. The battle was over. The surviving beast pirates, their morale shattered by the godlike display of power and the defeat of their invincible commander, turned their ironclad ships and fled. Naruto stood on the edge of the newly formed crater, breathing heavily. The attack had taken a lot out of him. He looked at the Thousand Sunny, still standing, protected by his body and his power. He had held his ground. He had protected their dream. Nami ran to the edge, her eyes taking in the devastation, then locking onto him. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't horrified. Her eyes shone with a fierce, unwavering certainty. She looked from his triumphant, solitary figure to the fleeing ships of an emperor's fleet. She turned to a stunned iceberg. "I need to make a revision to the charts," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "I need to add a new symbol to the legends of the sea. Not a skull and crossbones. Something new." She looked back at Naruto, a sun god standing amidst the storm he had both created and calmed. "A whirlpool," she whispered, "with a sun in the center." They were no longer a rumor. They were a declaration, and the entire world had just heard it. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. A Summit of Storms. The aftermath of the battle was a study in contrasts. A significant portion of Water 7's outer bay was a ruin, the sea churning where a stone pier once stood. Yet, the city itself was celebrating. The defeat of Jack the Drought, a supposedly invincible force of nature, by their new allies had ignited a spirit of defiant joy. The shipwrights of Galilea, who had stood ready to defend their home with hammers and nails, now saw Naruto not as a monster, but as a protector. He was their storm, the one that fought on their side. News crews descended upon the city like a flock of gulls, their cameras flashing, their reporters scribbling frantically. Within a day, the world knew. And the world reacted. New bounty posters were printed, distributed with an emergency speed that spoke of the world government's panic. Nami's poster was the first she'd ever had. A candid photo, taken mid-battle as she shouted orders from the scaffold, her expression a mixture of fierce concentration and ruthless command. Below the image, the words were stark. Cat burglar, Nami, the conqueror's compass. Bounty. 166 million berry. They had recognized her not just as a crewmate, but as the strategic mind behind the operation. It was a terrifying number. But Nami looked at it with a grim sense of satisfaction. They were taking her seriously. Naruto's was another matter entirely. His picture was a grainy, zoomed-in shot of him standing before the mammoth. A single hand raised to halt the unstoppable charge. The bounty was a declaration of war. Naruto Uzumaki, the Golden Whirlwind. Bounty. 2,500,000,000 berry. It was a number that placed him squarely in the same threat category as the emperors themselves. The poster was marked with a single, chilling instruction: dead or alive. Priority. Absolute. From the Grand Office at Marineford, Fleet Admiral Sakazuki slammed a fist on his desk, cracking the reinforced wood. "A new emperor declares himself," he snarled, molten rock dripping from his fingertips. "Send the admirals. Send the entire fleet. I want him erased." On a dark, chaotic island somewhere in the New World, Marshal D. Teach threw his head back and laughed, his booming voice shaking the ramshackle buildings around him. "A tailed beast bomb recentrican. Ziahahaha. Now that's a power worth having. This new era is getting more interesting by the minute." And in the hidden headquarters of the Revolutionary Army, Monkey D. Dragon stared at the poster, his expression unreadable. "A power that does not seek to rule, but to liberate," he murmured to Sabo. "He is either the world's greatest hope, Or a force that will burn it all down to create his new dawn? We must watch him closely. The world was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. But in Water 7, the focus was singular, finishing the ship. The battle had only reinforced their need for it. The Whirlwind was a fine vessel for skirmishes, but it would not survive the wars to come. A week later, as the final touches were being put on the rigging of the magnificent new ship, a different kind of vessel sailed into the ravaged bay. It was a single, elegant ship, its prow carved into the likeness of a red dragon. It flew a Florida G that every soul on the Grand Line knew and respected, a red-haired skull with 3 claw-like scars over its left eye. The Red Force. A wave of panic rippled through the city. Another emperor. Had Kaido sent his rival to finish the job? But this fleet was not an invading army. The ship docked, and a lone figure disembarked. He was a tall man with a calm, intelligent face, a rifle slung over his shoulder, and a cigarette dangling from his lips. Ben Beckman, first mate of the red-haired pirates, walked onto the docks of Water 7 as if he were taking a casual stroll. He didn't seek out the mayor or the military. He walked directly to Dock 1, his gaze sweeping over the near-complete Thousand Sunny with a professional's appreciation, before settling on Naruto and Nami, who stood waiting for him. "Naruto Uzumaki," Beckman said, his voice a calm baritone. There was no aggression in it, only a profound, unshakable confidence. "My captain, red-haired Shanks, requests a meeting." He paused, letting the weight of the name settle. "He feels it is time you two had a talk about the future of this world you seem so keen on changing." The air was thick with tension. This was not a challenge to a fight. It was a summons to a summit. "An emperor wants to talk," Nami said later, once Beckman had returned to his ship to await their answer. They stood in the galley of the Sunny, the fresh scent of Adam wood filling the room. "Why? It feels like a trap. He's the one who values the balance of the 3 great powers more than anyone. We just shattered that balance." "That's exactly why he wants to talk," Naruto countered. He looked out the porthole at the imposing silhouette of the Red Force. "He's not like Kaido. He doesn't rule through fear, he rules through influence and respect. He knows a battle with us would be costly for both sides, and for what? We're not after his territory. We're not after the One Piece. He's a politician as much as he is a pirate. He needs to know what our intentions are. And if he decides he doesn't like them," Nami challenged, her arms crossed, "then I'll know where his line is drawn," Naruto said simply. "I need to know who my enemies are, Nami. And more importantly, who they aren't. I'll go alone." Her head snapped up. "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. It's more dangerous to show fear or weakness," he argued gently. "This is a meeting of captains. Of leaders. Showing up with a fleet implies I need one. I need to face him on my own terms, to show him that my power isn't in my crew or my ship, but in my own will." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Trust me, the Sunny will be finished tomorrow. Have her ready. If things go wrong, get our crew and leave. The promise was that I would conquer the Grand Line for you, not that you would die with me trying." She hated the logic of it. She hated the risk. But she saw the unyielding resolve in his eyes and knew she couldn't change his mind. She nodded, her jaw tight. "One day," she said, her voice low, "if you're not back in 24 hours, I'm coming for you. And I'm bringing the entire city of Water 7 with me." A small smile touched his lips. "I know." The meeting point was an unnamed island in the New World. A jagged piece of black rock perpetually shrouded in a thunderstorm. As Naruto approached in a small skiff provided by Beckman, lightning split the sky, illuminating the desolate landscape. It was a fitting place for a meeting of titans. Shanks was waiting on the highest cliff, his black cape whipping in the wind. His core crew stood a respectful distance behind him: Beckman, Yasop, Lucky Roo. They were a deceptively relaxed group, yet Naruto could feel the immense, dormant power coiled within each of them. But all his attention was on the red-haired man. Shish. Shanks was not physically imposing like Kaido, but the sheer force of his presence was overwhelming. It was like standing next to a star, a quiet, gravitational pull that bent the world around it. "So, you're the one causing all the trouble," Shanks said as Naruto stepped onto the cliff top. His voice was friendly, but his one good eye was as sharp and discerning as a hawk's. "I have to admit, you've He made more noise in a few months than most crews do in a lifetime. I'm not here to make noise, Naruto replied, his own presence a stark contrast to Shanks. Where Shanks was a tempest, Naruto was the calm. A movable mountain at its center. I'm here to change the weather. Shanks chuckled, a deep, hearty sound. A noble goal, but every man who's ever said that has tried to claim the One Piece and the title of Pirate King to do it. Is that what you're after? Because that's a path that leads directly through me. I have no interest in a dead man's treasure or an empty title, Naruto stated flatly. My goal is simpler. I made a promise to my navigator. I promised to give her a world free from the tyranny of men like Kaido and the hypocrisy of the world government. A world where she can draw her maps without fear. To do that, I will conquer the Grand Line. Not to rule it, but to set it free. The friendliness vanished from Shanks' face, replaced by a gaze of incredible intensity. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen pressure. It was a suffocating force, a spiritual weight that sought to crush the will of those who stood before him. The very rocks at their feet began to crack. Lesser men would have fainted, their minds broken by the sheer force of his will. Conqueror's Haki, you speak of tearing down the world, Shanks said, his voice a low growl that seemed to vibrate in Naruto's bones. That is a dangerous promise. The balance of this era is fragile. A war on that scale will drown the world in blood. Naruto didn't flinch. He didn't buckle. He met the crushing wave of Haki not with his own aggressive force, but with an absolute, unyielding calm. The orange pigmentation of sage mode appeared around his eyes, and he drew on the boundless, serene energy of the world itself. He became a part of the unshakable rock, the endless sky, the raging sea. Kurama, sensing the challenge from within, added his own colossal presence to the mix, a deep, ancient power that had seen the birth and death of ages. Shanks' Haki, a tsunami of personal ambition and willpower, slammed against Naruto's aura. It was like a wave breaking against a continent. The Haki didn't penetrate, it simply flowed around him. Unable to find a purchase, unable to shake the core of a man who was one with the world he stood upon. The clouds above them, already dark and stormy, were ripped apart. A visible rift formed in the sky, splitting the heavens in two, a testament to the cataclysmic clash of wills taking place on the small cliff below. Shanks' eyes widened slightly. He had met men with strong wills before. Whitebeard, Roger. But this was different. This wasn't the will to conquer or the will to be free. It was the will to create, a will as fundamental and unshakable as a law of nature. He let his Haki recede. The pressure vanished, and the world rushed back in. He looked at Naruto with a new, profound respect. You really mean it, Shanks said, a slow smile returning to his face. You're not a pirate, you're a force of nature. He walked over and offered a massive sake gourd. A drink, then, between two men who are about to make the world a very chaotic place. Naruto accepted the gourd and took a long drink. The sake was strong, burning a warm path down his throat. I won't help you, Shanks said, taking the gourd back. Your path is not mine. I believe this world, for all its flaws, is worth preserving. You believe it must be broken to be remade. We stand on opposite sides of that ideal. So we are enemies, Naruto stated. No, Shanks corrected. Not yet. We are rivals. I will not stand in your way as you deal with Kaido, Big Mom, or the government. Frankly, they could all use a good shaking up. But know this, Naruto Uzumaki. I am the guardian of the balance. If your revolution, your conquest, threatens to burn everything to ash, if you become a greater monster than the ones you seek to destroy, then you and I will meet on this sea again. And on that day, we will be enemies. It was a pact and a warning, delivered in one breath. Naruto understood. He had secured Shanks' neutrality, but he had also acquired a judge. Fair enough, Naruto said, nodding. When I'm finished, there will be no need for guardians. He turned and left without another word, his skiff disappearing back into the storm. Ben Beckman walked up to his captain. That was a risk, letting a power like that go unchecked. Was it, Shanks mused, looking up at the split sky. Or was it the only move we could make? You can't stop a hurricane, Ben. You can only try to steer it away from the things you want to protect. He took another long drink of sake. Besides, I have a feeling he's going to make a world that my friend Roger would have loved to see. Naruto returned to a finished ship. The Thousand Sunny was a marvel, its atom-wood hull gleaming, its sails furled, waiting. At its head was a smiling, sunny lion, a figure of boundless optimism. It was perfect. Nami met him at the dock, her eyes searching his face. He gave her a reassuring smile. We have an opening. The entire city of Water 7 came to see them off. They were no longer pirates to be feared, but heroes to be cheered. Iceberg and the galley foreman stood on the shore, their faces filled with pride. She's all yours, Iceberg shouted over the cheering crowd. A ship of dreams, built to sail to the end of the world and back. Thank you, Nami yelled back, tears of joy in her eyes. She stood at the helm of a ship built just for her, for them.